The Sustainable Voice, bringing you big successes from small places worldwide.
Welcome back to the Sustainable Voice. This is Ashish along with my co-host Lee. How are you?
I'm great, thank you. Happy to see
Excellent.
you.
Likewise. We're getting back on track. Last week was a pretty powerful. Last episode rather was a pretty powerful episode. It was on my late father. So we're getting back to Colombia, but specifically to Medellin. And
Hmm.
one of the final conversations I had with him was about Colombia.
Oh.
Was he was actually this year October he was supposed to go to Colombia with my mother to celebrate the
Hmm.
50th anniversary.
Hmm.
And he said, I want to go to Colombia because I want to see what's been built. I want to see what all the all the talk is. He goes,
Hmm.
you keep talking about Colombia. You've been there this year will be 42 times.
Yeah.
I want to see what all the talk is because honestly, it's incessant,
Hmm.
or it's nonstop. And I guess he was getting jealous of the fact that I was talking about this more than I was about Kenya or anywhere else.
Yeah.
So it was good. So and we talked about Medellin a lot. We talked
Hmm.
about the transformation of this country. Now, you and I have talked about Colombia because during the pandemic, you and I talked a lot about the stuff that was being done with Cartagena Unida and with just providing food in Colombia.
Hmm.
Paul always laughs about the fact that 42 times he gets suspicious. But what do you think about Colombia?
Well, just from my little exposure to them through the live Zoom calls that we did, I just was so struck by their passion
Mhm.
and their commitment to each other. And um, forget about, I mean, the architecture, all that is very appealing to me, but what really got me was just who they are as a people, and how much they cared, and it seemed, really genuine. These were just regular people out trying to make a difference, and that was just amazing to me.
1,000%. When in our earlier episodes we were talking about Colombia, and we've talked about Colombia quite a few times on this podcast, and it's very dear to me, very near to me. And one of the things that we've talked about is this notion that, well, not even a notion, but it's reality that there's almost like they are willing to work twice as hard to erase the stereotype that you're likely going to have entering the country, right? We all know what Colombia stood for at one point.
Yeah.
And it's almost like everybody, and we talked about this before, that everybody wants to work twice as hard because they're not just trying to get you to fall in love with the country. They're also at the same time trying to get you to forget or to forgive or to look past or to look beyond what was in the news. You know,
Right. And I think not only us, but even themselves. I mean, like, I
right?
really felt like they were trying to prove to themselves that they were more than the what the world saw them as, just even for their own
Yeah.
purposes of moving forward in life.
Well, I'll tell you, that's actually really well put because that's actually what we saw as well, specifically
Hmm.
around Comuna 13, around the city itself. People go to Medellin and you've watched Narcos, you've watched these documentaries, and all of
Hmm.
a sudden everything is just Hollywoodized. And they get here and there's something unique that's happening or that has been happening in Medellin in that you're entering a generation of residents in Medellin and in Colombia as a whole that maybe don't remember who Pablo Escobar was,
Hmm. Yeah. Good.
or they weren't because they weren't around when he was around. So it's something that's unique because when you go through Medellin, there is a section of the people who still revere him as El
Hmm.
Patron. Then there's a section of the people who realize that he was a monster.
Yeah.
And much like anywhere else in society, as the next generation comes about, what they're taught is what they believe.
Hmm.
So if they are taught from the school of El Patron, that's what they're going to go. That's what they're going to believe. If they are taught from the school of he's a monster, that's what they're going to believe. And I think that's something that's very unique to Medellin because if you look at other parts of the world, it doesn't matter the country, Yes, they have to overcome past dictators. Yes, they have to overcome, a history that maybe is not as colorful or not as positive.
Hmm.
But I've not seen a country where they still have two parallels of a history being told and
Hmm.
being taught, and they have to reconcile that for themselves. They have to reconcile for themselves, and they have to. I don't know how to describe it except to say that, and I've seen it firsthand. That you talk to two people, and they don't get defensive with each other about it, right? They
Yeah.
don't argue with each other about disagree about who he was or what he did. But there's shrines put up, and then there's X's put up, and then there's faces scratched off, then there's temples put up, and then there's this put up.
Yeah.
Nobody will come out and say it, but it is an underswell, I guess is the right word, an undercurrent of what's not a tension, but a silent debate that's occurring
Interesting.
between the two.
I was going to ask you how solid their footing is moving forward. Like, is there a possible, are they still on that precipice of really being able to put that in the past, or is there enough? And it sounds like maybe there is under footing of um still revering him. And he must have been, I mean, there must be a reason for that. So even with all the bad stuff he was doing, he probably was still putting food on everybody's table one way or another. So,
This is it, right? I mean, who are we to judge what's right or wrong, right? That's for the
hmm.
people of Colombia to decide what they want to believe.
Hmm.
I think, look, the area of Medellin and Antioquia as a department as a whole is definitely moving in the right direction in
Hmm.
terms of, really telling their story well. Like when you go to Medellin and you talk to people there, it is just incredible the types of stories they tell you because they're very open
Hmm.
about their experiences with the cartels. They don't try to shy from it. And that's very different than when I first went to Colombia in 2006. It was like the taboo nobody wanted to talk about, right?
Mm.
They all
Yeah.
knew he existed, but beyond that, in fact, one of my friends who's a guide will basically come and say, the person whose name we shall not mention.
Ah,
It was like a Monty Python skit.
yeah.
He whose name we shall not
Shall not
say.
be. Yeah.
Whose name is, and I literally, all I could picture in my back of my head was King Arthur on that wooden horse driving it. That's all I could picture. It's just that is
Yeah.
this looks like something out of a Monty Python skit.
Hmm.
But you go from that to, yes, some people still don't want to talk about him,
Hmm.
but what I give them a lot of credit for is they are surprisingly open,
Hmm.
surprisingly willing to share their
Hmm.
story. A
Yeah.
lot of it is a story of pain, right? There are more people that felt pain than didn't.
Yeah.
And they'll talk about how they had to move out of the city. Places like Camino 13 and the other communas they wouldn't have existed. Well, maybe they would have, but they wouldn't have been as densely populated if people weren't trying to leave to get away from roadside bombs. Now, to the other part of what you said, though, which I think is spot on, is putting it behind them.
Hmm.
I don't think that's ever going to happen.
Yeah.
If you go to parts of Europe and you deal with a World War II history, good or bad, right? If you go to Germany and you look at that, go to Poland, uh, it's never going to happen. And I'll share with you, and this is a parallel. So one of our closest family friends, she is Polish, and her father was a prisoner at Auschwitz.
Hmm.
And I had a long conversation with him before he passed, and just sat because I had taken a whole in-depth study on the Holocaust in college, and I was always just really intrigued by how this can happen, right? How one person can reach this status where he's just blindly followed, he or she.
Hmm.
And so I was talking to him about Auschwitz. And whenever I talk to somebody in Medellin about their time with the cartels, it's not the same thing. And I want to stress, I know it's not the same thing. And I don't,
Hmm.
before I get completely crucified on Twitter, or X as they call it, I want to
Yeah.
stress, I know it's not the same thing.
Yeah.
But I always think about that conversation with Cass. I think about that conversation with him about his time at Auschwitz because he talks in depth about not his torture or his time, but why it happened.
Mm.
And I think that's the thing and he said this to me. He said, because I asked him what you asked, I said, is there any place for Poland and for parts of Europe to move past it? he said you can't move past what can't be removed.
Right.
And he's not wrong.
Right.
He's not wrong. And it's the same thing here. You can't move past what can't be removed. So when you talk to the people of Medellin, you talk to all of them, right? And I 42 visits, I've talked to all of them. I even was there with a conference for sustainability, and we were actually going in depth and talking into some of the looking at transformative experiences, right? Looking how tourism has transformed, and looking at the inner city and how hydroponics has come in. In fact, we even, had guides who were at one point were using music not resent, but to what's the word I'm looking for? What's the word I'm looking for? I can't believe I can't find the word.
Describe it to me.
Well,
Hold on.
they're trying to push back. Holy cow!
Resentment.
No.
No.
What's the word I'm looking for? I can't believe I would come.
Recidivism. I don't know.
Well, I guess. Yeah.
No.
Okay. But anyway, using this to basically push back on the tanks that were coming into Kingdom 13, using music as a way as a resistance to
resistance.
this.
There you go.
I can't believe my fifth grade teacher would be so unhappy with me right now. But as a means of that, to be able to actually has a form of resistance, right, towards those tanks coming in and whatnot. And you see these transformation stories, whether it's a guy in the inner city, whether it's somebody who's using music, whether it's somebody who's turned around their life from what they were doing to what they're doing now. You're able to look at that, and the one broad stroke you see across all of them is they're not trying to hide what happened.
Yeah.
None of them. But I think what's unique with Medellin is it's not just one moment. For example, if you go to Community 13, the story isn't just about the cartels. It's also about how the tanks and the army was up in this region in the early 2000s, how this was a battleground in the early 2000s. That's long after Escobar's time, but yet it was a battleground. And now all of a sudden it's there. The town, like what you got behind you in Guatapé, what that looked like at one point versus what it looks like now. I mean, there are hotels being built left and right in Guatapé now, just because of how busy it's getting, right? So you compare that to what it was. So there's the transformation is definitely there, but beyond the transformation, there's this, again, just this acceptance that it's not going to magically be just vanished. It's not going to magically vanish where nobody will know it ever existed, or when nobody will know the cartels ever existed. That's it can't. It is always going to be there. What they're doing, which I think is so admirable, is they are transforming not just Medellin, but Medellin, I always say, is a microcosm of the whole country. But they are transforming the country where it's not being held over their head.
Right.
So, I mean.
Yeah, you're right. You can't move forward without bringing your past with you. I don't think you're right about that. And makes it all more sweeter being that.
100%. You and I have talked about, your past with the Coast Guard and as the ships, my past. It's what shapes us, good or bad. Good or bad, it's what shapes us. And where the precipice that I think Medellin in particular is on right now is this next generation that's coming in, and this is happening all over the world, by the way. It's not just here, right? So there was a really cool study that I read about this that talked about the next generation. They weren't taught to hate, right? This new generation wasn't taught to hate. They are not taught the same divisiveness that we were taught, or that our previous generations were taught. So all of a sudden, hard battle lines where, let's say, between one race and another, or one religion and another, or between one country and another, are starting to blend now and starting to become gray. Because those same divisive lessons that previous generations were taught have not made it to this generation.
That's a big deal. Wouldn't that be nice if we could do that in the United States? But
oh my gosh,
how in the world, how do they accomplish that? Like, that's a big deal. That's a conscious, someone had to have a conscious effort, and that had to become a movement. So is there a...
So what this study talked about, I think it was Harvard Business Review, and I'm not sure, but I have to look it up. But it was actually not just one; it was several studies. And I then talked to the professor who wrote the study, just because I was so curious. I'm a history buff, and his theory was not that the previous generation, our generation, made a conscious effort to not teach it. It was that the next generation made a conscious effort to resist it, to not accept it,
Mm.
right? And what he actually, and this is going to be sensitive, so whoever's listening, please don't crucify me on Twitter again, or any social media. But I think it's important to bring up, right? What he talked about is what's happening between Gaza and between Muslims and Jewish, or between
Mm-hmm.
Gaza and Israel, and
Mm-hmm.
not just a territory, but the new generation isn't taught those hard lines, right? Now he himself is Jewish, and the author, and he was speaking from, because he had served in the Jewish army, he in the military in Israel. This is Jewish army. I'm sorry, the Israeli army.
Mm-hmm.
He had served there, and he had actually was talking from that standpoint, that he noticed with his own kids, that instead of basically, where he went to his father and he said, okay, I'm next in line to serve, his kids are asking him why there's a military to begin with. Why is there
Mm-hmm.
why is there their right to exist being challenged? So
Yeah.
instead of just saying, we have a right to exist, it's why is it being challenged? So same thing here in Colombia, right? So same thing here. What that same study? Because I asked him about Colombia, and I asked him, I said, can you draw a parallel? I know it's not the same thing, but can you draw a
Mm-hmm.
parallel? And he basically, what it came through was, he essentially, he came back and he said the parallel in places like Colombia, places like the former Baltic states,
Mm-hmm.
the former Soviet bloc, or in other parts of South America or Venezuela or other areas, is that this generation now will basically, um, essentially, they would come up and say that the new generation is essentially saying, look, this was your past, not ours.
Mm-hmm.
Why do we have to carry your baggage? Why do we have to do this? And the main reason, and he said this, he said Netflix and other streaming sites didn't exist in our
Mm.
generation at this age. Now all
Yeah.
of a sudden they exist. These kids have access to information in a greater form than any of us. That's why attention spans are getting so short. He said the average attention span for websites, for example, is down to 8 seconds.
Yeah.
And he said it's because our attention span is this, an assault on our attention span. He goes, as our generation, our parents' generation, it's hard to keep up. But this new generation, they still have room to go. They're able to process information at a more rapid rate. And he was talking about Colombia and said, I would be willing to bet. He said, I'd be willing to do a study, but I'd be willing to bet that the people of Colombia, specifically around Medellin, that they have so much access to information, whether it's a Netflix show like Narcos, or whether it's a
Mm-hmm.
documentary on Escobar, or whether it's something on Medellin, or articles about the resurgence of Medellin, or articles about how many flowers are imported from Medellin to the United States all of a
Mm-hmm.
sudden now. And now they're looking at all of that.
Yeah.
And it's blurring the lines of where somebody's saying, well, you're supposed to not like these people, or you're supposed to not talk about this, or you're supposed to say this person was a monster, or this person was a hero, or whatever the case is, right?
Mm-hmm.
They're forming their own opinions.
Yeah.
And it sounds simple, but really, what was it? Was it Plato or whoever it was that basically talked about it? You tell somebody, it was Plato in his book, The Republic. We talked about the fire in the cave, right? You tell somebody about, you have them all facing the wall, and you're telling them what the fire looks like. It's this big, and it's this color, it's this, and nobody's willing to turn around. Everybody is willing to look at the shadow on the wall and take your word for it. That's why any politician gets up on stage and tells you the sky's falling enough times, you'll believe him at a certain
Yeah.
point.
Right.
It's why you go through a car dealership, and the car salesman says, well, this one's about to sell tomorrow. Part of you may want to believe him,
Mm-hmm.
right? Or her. This generation doesn't.
Mm.
This
A generation
generation,
of skeptics
yeah, that's right.
or free thinkers, maybe.
Free thinkers. I think skeptics is the right word.
Yeah.
I think skeptics is the right word. And it's funny you say skeptics, because he talked about them as being, what did he say? Not skeptics. He said they're not trusting. And he
Yeah.
used the same thing as skeptic, but he
Yeah.
said they are very slow to trust people, because they've been, there's conspiracy theories abound. And he said it's almost like there's too much information being processed into their brain, and that they're forming opinions based on either a series of incomplete thoughts or one complete thought. But it's a series of that. So when we talked about Medellin, I was telling him, I said, Medellin is a microcosm of the whole country. Medellin, the transformation of Medellin represents what Colombia is becoming. And when you look next door to Venezuela, it is what's starting or needs to happen there. In fact, even if we bring Venezuela into the mix, when you look at parts of Colombia, you look at Cartagena, you look at other parts, there's mixed reactions to Venezuela, right? In terms of Venezuelan citizens moving into Colombia, coming into Colombia, seeking asylum. In Medellin, there's signs all over Community 13 and a thought process, not universal, but quite a loud thought process that said that when we were in trouble, that you took us in. Now this is your home. A complete different approach than what you see in Cartagena or what you see in other parts of Colombia is what you see here. Yeah. So when I talked to this author about this, and I talked to him about what just what somebody says and what the experience is and what they feel, it is very much this notion that they're just not trusting. They're not trusting of information, and they're seeing everything coming together and saying, we want to form our own opinion. So they're not letting their previous generation tell them what to think of El Patron or Pablo Escobar, what to think of the cartels, or whether to talk about it or not, what to think about Community 13 and the tanks, what to think about this, what to think about that. They're not telling them, they're doing it themselves.
So do you have some superstar standout citizens of Medellin that are out there on the ground doing things that really are standouts?
I do. Doña Sakura is one of them. So Doña Sakura, so our foundation supports this community center in my Community 13 called AMI. There's actually, I met her through Cabal, who's a local guide there, and through Julio, who's a friend and station manager in that part. And she is just, I mean, you can't help but just gravitate towards her. And I've talked to you about her. Because of what she does, right? It's just, there's nothing but gratitude and gratefulness. She will never talk about the effect the cartels had on her because that's her generation. But she's also not staying silent. Right? So she won't judge you on what you think, but she's not staying silent. So I remember when I first met her, she had talked about shoes. And I first met her and I always ask, like, how can we help? Just because I want to know what the person will say. And then if they say, well, I need money or I need that, then I kind of like, okay, let's be a little bit careful here. She right off the bat said, I have this many children. I need shoes. Okay. So we got shoes. And then she said it wasn't like I need more. It was, wow. She was so grateful. And I remember we had delivered this just I think it was about 100 or 200 pairs of shoes. I forget what it was. It was in 2021 or 2022. I forget the year, but we had delivered a whole bunch of these shoes. And she had basically come up and said, I don't know where you came from. Oh. Came to me and she said, I don't know where you came from. So nice. She goes, I don't know where you came from. She goes, but I'm grateful every day you're here. And you know what? That's huge. That's huge. The fact that it takes a lot for a person to say that. And even now, we just got done building her this kitchen, and the kitchen wasn't because she asked for it, because we went to her and saw it and said, what are you doing here? She's like, I'm feeding 25 children a day. And I said, how many kids do you have coming here? She goes, more than I can feed. And for some of them, this is the only meal they're going to get that day. And I'll tell you, it was incredible listening to her story, because when I started listening to her story more, and I actually got to know her, she started telling me some pretty stories, some pretty hard stories to hear about her experience with the cartels, her experience when she was younger. Some of them were pretty hard to hear. Actually, all of them were pretty hard to hear. But she still has a smile on her face. She still has a smile on her, and she has every reason not to smile. And she has a smile on her face. And so this kitchen that's done now allows her to feed 100 children a day. And you should see the look on her face. I have video from her, and she's blowing kisses and this and whatnot. And you can't help but just gravitate towards her, because, people, somebody like her, if she had a horrible attitude, you would be like, I can't blame them.
Yeah.
No, you know what?
Right.
They got a crappy lot in life.
Uh,
I don't blame them.
yeah.
But when you see her and how she acts and just bubbling with energy and smiling, you look back and go, what am I upset about?
Oh, I love that.
Oh, it's great.
Yeah.
So she's one of them. She's a person I've admired for years,
Mm-hmm.
in terms of what they do there.
Yeah.
So that's one. And there's a bunch of other people like her, but that's one of them
Mm-hmm.
where, and again, see what they're doing here. They're not saying, well, he who we shall not speak of,
Mm-hmm.
or saying, well, let's not talk about this history. She's identified a problem.
Mm-hmm.
And she's identified a problem, and she has said, this is an issue here. We want to approach this. And she
Mm-hmm.
does it the right way, right? Nothing is ever going to be perfect. So I'm sure she's made a couple of missteps along the way. But when you talk to her, oh my gosh, it's like it's when you talk to somebody and it's like a source of energy, you just
Yeah.
feel that's what I get from her.
Yeah.
I saw her
Yeah.
last year, when I gone to see her, and then I walked up, and it was the craziest thing, right? I had seen her every year and it's never been a problem. This time she hugged me. There was something in
Oh.
her hug, and I felt this energy go into my body, and I got
Mm-hmm.
emotional.
Oh.
And she literally she said, you make sure you keep talking to me. She goes, you stay close. And she said, you're here. She goes,
Oh.
you're here. And
Wow.
she points to her heart. And I'm like,
Oh.
like it's
That's
there. And,
so.
and, and she is talking about more than, and I could tell, when a person talks to you like her, there's more to what it means when she's talking about whatever she says.
Mm-hmm.
There's more to it than what she says. There's a meaning behind it, greater meaning behind what she's saying.
Yeah.
So and I remember I was emotional because I was hugging her, and I just looked up at her, and she looked at me straight, and she said, listen, she said, I don't know where you came from. Again, she said that again.
Uh-huh.
I don't know where you came from. She goes, but you're here. She points to her heart. She said, you're here. She said, you need to stay close.
Mm-hmm.
Stay
Mm-hmm.
close. And it's funny when I started hearing the stay close part.
Mm-hmm.
And then we got in there and started sitting down with everybody and talking to all the children. These kids these kids all knew who Michael Jordan was, all knew who LeBron
Ah,
James was. They had all
yeah.
gotten into Western pop culture and everything else. And they started seeing that their way of life and that where they lived was a place that people admired, right?
Yeah.
They weren't looked down on. So, for example, Madonna, she had a whole song about Medellin
Mm-hmm.
with Maluma that she actually recorded in Camino 13. So
Mm-hmm.
these kids are seeing somebody like Madonna come through. They don't know who she is,
Yeah.
but they see her come through, but they know who Maluma is. And they see him walking through there as well. And all of a sudden they get to see this performance here, and they get to see his transformation. And it's giving them worth,
Mm-hmm.
where it's okay that they don't feel ashamed about where they
Yeah.
live and where they are. In fact, they're proud of it. It's
Mm-hmm.
really quite special.
I wondered, of course, I can imagine what the ripple effects would be. I'm sure we all can, but I love that pride of country is sort of at the top of that for sure.
100%. There's a picture I have of two of the guides we work with. Cabal's one of them, and this other guy who's just amazing. And there's Freddie and Jason, but Cabal and his friend, they have tattoos on their arms. So I have him like this, going like this, hands out like this, right? And
Yeah.
on his knuckles it said "Good Life" is
Oh,
what it says on the knuckles. And I just literally, I went home, I told my wife, I said, "What do you think?" She goes, "Don't you dare!" She goes, "Don't even think about it."
apparently now, if you really want to be trusted by this generation, the generation of skeptics, you need to have some body art. Did you know that?
Apparently, yes.
You do. Like
Apparently,
there's
yes.
statistics about this. Salespeople who have tattoos are outperforming salespeople without.
It's expression, I guess, of
Yeah,
some
I guess.
form, and I mean, I can't bring myself to it. I just can't.
Yeah, no, me
I,
either. Me either.
I'm not. There's
Uh,
not there's anything wrong with it. I just can't bring myself to it. I mean,
yeah,
but you're right. It is a form of expression. I think
yeah,
that's you've hit something there. It's not the body of it. It's
right,
the fact that it's open expression,
right.
right? It's open expression. And that's something, right? When you go back generations, the way we express ourselves today, whether it's sorrow, whether it's joy, whether it's controversy, the way we express ourselves today, whether it's you, me, whether it's our
Hmm.
kids, whether it's, whatever generation, there are so many mediums. to express that, whether it's social media, whether it's in person, whether it's, email, whether it's, I mean, there's so many mediums, video being of course the prominent one.
Mm-hmm.
We didn't have that, right? So a lot of this was just suppressed.
Yeah.
Don't expressions is a form of weakness. Don't do it.
Right.
Expressions is a form of weakness. Just suppress it. Don't. It's a form of weakness. Don't do it. Right?
Mm-hmm.
You think about something. You're such a drama queen. Stop it. Just that's it. Right? I mean, you get that. But then you look at this generation and they are expressing themselves. And this is the truth when you talk, and I've had this, right? You go to Medellin and you talk to somebody who's an elder. They
Mm-hmm.
will tell you stories about their childhood and having to move because of roadside bombs going off on their streets, and they're having to move. And they're powerful stories, right?
Yeah.
What they won't tell you is how they really feel unless you really push. You
Yeah.
go to the next generation, they will start with how they feel
Mm-hmm.
because the childhood experiences that the previous generation had don't apply to them.
Yeah.
They're reading about it in history. They're reading about it and learning about it through whatever they're finding out on their own, not what they're relying on being told to them, but they're finding out about it on their own. And then they're expressing themselves as to, because they'll, for example, I remember I talked to one of the kids at that center, and we weren't talking about the cartels, but we were talking about Community 13, and we were talking about just what it was like. And he said, well, my older brother told me about the day the tanks came in and what it was like. And they start talking, and it's not the tanks rolled in and fired guns, that, because they were using live ammo. It was my older brother, or my older cousin, or whatever, my primo told me about the day these tanks rolled in and how it felt. That last few words, how it felt.
How it felt.
What was
Yeah.
missing. One of the guys I talked to a lot, his name is Jason. Him and his brother Freddie. They way up in Community 13, and there's a huge population of basically what we call African Colombians, right? So they are of African descent. They are in all over Colombia, whether it's Cartagena, whether it's Medellin, and they talk about how their ancestors got here, right? And whether it's through slavery, whether it's through settlement, whatever the case. But they talk about different ways. But when you talk to Jason, he takes you up to the very top part of Community 13 and shows you where the bullet holes are. It says, look, this is what was here. But he's not drawing a picture of, oh, the tanks were down there. This is what happened. It's not Universal Studios. He's not recounting some adventure flick for you, right?
Yeah.
He's actually telling you what music represented for them, why him and his brother and his family, why they're into music, and specifically on percussion and what they're doing, and the Afro beats that they're using, what that did for them, how it helped them cope through this time, how they were able to actually get through this. That's huge.
Yeah.
That's something that gets missed a lot.
Yeah.
And I think that's I talked to Jason about this too, along with a couple of his friends, and he's talking about hydroponics now, right? He's talking about hydroponics and what they're into and everything else. And I'm looking at this going, holy cow, how do you go from that story about the tanks to percussion to hydroponics and everything else? And he's done drum work now for Rihanna. He's done stuff for some major celebrities, and it's a huge pride moment for him when he talks about how he's able to transcend his environment.
Yeah.
But it's what you said. It's it's how they felt. It's expression.
Right. So what do you see on the path forward for maybe specifically for Medellin, since that's what we're talking about, and you've been there? What do you see on the horizon as progress? Do they have a vision that you're aware of maybe, or is there
That's a great question. That's
a
a
hard
loaded
one,
question
probably. It's
too.
a loaded question, but I mean, I'm sure you're there enough that you see progress, and you maybe see you've talked to them about what they hope for the city. And
look, I mean, everybody I've talked to, transformation is key, right? Transformation is at the center of almost every conversation. But I think that they're at an inflection point. Medellin is, and what I mean by that is, tourism is the second largest export out of Colombia right now. It's ahead of coffee. It's only behind oil. And I think Antioquia as a whole is at an inflection point where they are deciding for themselves how important tourism is. What I mean by that is the town is behind you, Guatapé. Up until 2 years ago, it was that town. Now there's hotels being just, built left and right. There's bulldozers there, and this street closed and that street closed. So the commercial apparatus is taking over, right? And that's good and bad, right? The
Yeah.
idea behind this is to control how many people are here. But there's a commercial apparatus that's taking over. There's an inflection point that they're at where they have to balance between tourism for transformation and tourism as a replacement economy.
Yeah,
Two completely different roads.
for
The
sure.
tourism as a replacement economy can be a good thing, but also be detrimental if it's not managed carefully.
Mm-hmm.
And the tourism for transformation, that's a temporary road. That's not a permanent road. At some point, you graduate from transformation. So they're at that point where, again, this new generation is there. The transformation aspect is now graduating into something more. And the tourism as a replacement economy aspect, that's one that I think that's the inflection point. That's not just Medellin. That's even Antioquia as a whole, right? So you have investors coming in, putting down just stupid amounts of money to build a hotel here and build a hotel there and do this, without any kind of a plan for what they mean. So, for example, one particular hotel has built this beautiful place, and the idea is to feed into the local community, right? So, meaning that you're providing for them, or they're providing for you, and whatnot. A symbiotic relationship that they're trying to start.
Mm-hmm.
The challenge is that the people who are investing in it and the people who are running it are not necessarily aligned.
Yeah.
Right.
Right.
So everybody wants to be part of the tourism economy. Doesn't mean everybody should. Right. And if everybody is, their clear vision of what they want out of it has to go beyond financial gain. And that's the inflection point. Right.
Yeah.
Tourism as a replacement economy. If you are entering tourism because you still believe in transformation and you want to protect that transformation, great. But if you're joining it because, hey, you know what? Look how much money people are making. I want to make money here too.
Yeah.
That's a dangerous slope. That's a very slippery slope to go down.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
to your question, is there a vision? Yes, but I think it's too broad. I think they're at an inflection point where that vision needs to be focused on a bit more.
So how do we, as travelers, if we're going there, how do we, not that we have to get in the middle of their politics, but what do we do to support to support the one person who needs our support, or the community that needs our support, rather than the corporation that is just dumped? How do we know? How do we know the difference?
That's the question. That's it right there. So to the first part, because you've asked the right question there, and that's worldwide, right? How do you know what's real? Right? It's not just here, but worldwide. How do you know what's real? So you have to, first of all, get out of the city. You have to get out of Medellin, right? You have to get into the outskirts. You have to get into some of the smaller areas. And you have to actually then start having conversations, but you got to observe. You have to observe and see what's happening, right? So prime example, right? If you are visiting a place in Cartagena or in Medellin, excuse me, and let's say in Medellin it is, I don't know, let's say quiet. Let's say you get there and you go to a neighborhood and you say, wow, this is a really cool neighborhood, and then you see the prices and go, wow, this is so cheap. Look how inexpensive it is. I could buy a house here and have a place here and da, 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 da. Okay, great. That's not a bad thing. But the second question that's not being asked is, who would benefit from my stay here? Or who would benefit from my visit here? So if you're visiting as a traveler, and you're going through, put aside the fact that you want to learn about the country. That's great. You're going to go to the museum, you're going to go to the history, you're going to learn about the transformation. That's awesome. Put that aside. But actually listen to what local people are saying, and then just ask them one question. Why is tourism so important here? You're going to get 10 different answers. And I'll tell you why this is effective. So we were in Bogota. I believe it was 2016, but I could be wrong. We were in Bogota when the peace treaty with the FARC was signed. I was with a group in Bogota. We actually had lunch with those two ministers that brokered the peace treaty, because they were running the sustainable tourism aspect for the government as well. So we had lunch with them, and then that night they told us that they were putting a plan through, their last offer through to the FARC. And that night the news broke on BBC that the treaty was signed.
Wow.
right? And then we saw their pictures, like, hey, we just had lunch with those guys like
Yeah.
4 hours ago.
Ah, cool.
And the next morning, I remember the group I was with, we canceled all of our plans and went into Candelaria, which is the graffiti section, the old part of Cartagena,
Hmm.
Bogota, excuse me. And we basically went in and started talking to the graffiti artists. So, what do you think?
Hmm.
We got such a variety of answers, but it was very clear that there were two separate camps. It wasn't like five
Mm.
different answers. It was two camps. People who said, "Look, this is a good thing for the economy," and people who said, "You know what? You can't just simply say, okay, join. There's a lot. You have to apologize for some stuff first. There's a lot of pain that was caused here." Two very split camps. It was a polarizing topic.
Hmm.
And from that polarizing topic, we realized, along with everybody else who was with us, that okay, the power that tourism has here is to be respectful of how they feel
Mm.
and to not try to sway one's decision, but to be respectful of how they feel. So if we're, to be able to take places, go visit places like Caño Costales, like San Agustin, the places that were off the beaten track, that were just simply unavailable, right?
Hmm.
Not accessible during the paramilitary time. They weren't accessible, and now all of a sudden they are. Visit them, incorporate them, but do it in a responsible, respective way, right? We're not going there and say, oh, look what's here, but to go in and see. So that
Yeah.
we realized that because we asked them all, said, how would you feel if we brought travelers here? The one thing they all agreed on was, well, we actually would want you to see it because we're proud of our country. We do want you to go there.
Yeah.
We either agree with what the treaty or we don't agree with the treaty, but it doesn't stop the fact that we do want you to go and see this,
Oh,
which was interesting.
yeah.
So same thing. So if you're traveling to Medellin, the same thing has to happen. The polarizing topic is the inflection point, right? The transformation of Medellin. You don't want to go up to somebody and ask them and say, how do you feel about Pablo Escobar? You're going to get 10 different answers and might even get a smack.
Yeah.
But you want to be respectful and say, how do you feel about Medellin today versus 30 years ago or
Hmm.
40 years ago or 50 years ago?
Hmm.
And just listen.
Yeah.
You're going to find two very clear answers, but it is quite amazing when they talk to you. But you got to ask that question in Medellin. Then you got to ask that question in Kingdom 13. Then you got to ask that question in towns like Marinilla. Then you got to ask this question in different areas. So I asked this question. There's a guitar shop that's outside of Marinilla, or outside of Medellin. That's a really amazing guitar shop. It was 4 generations, and the patriarch just recently passed away,
Mm.
and he was handmade guitars
Wow.
and just amazing works of art.
Hmm.
And so I had asked him, I said, why guitars? And he
Mm.
goes, and I was asking in Spanish. He goes, what do you mean? I said, well, I said, you have a store here that's handed down by generations. It's handmade guitars. They look amazing. But why this? Why not a restaurant or a
Hmm.
hotel or a transport company? Why? He said, if you talk to anybody who was here in 2000, so notice he didn't go back to when the cartels were here. He said, if you
Hmm.
talk to anybody who was here in the early 2000s, it was music that got us through all the internal strife. It
Mm.
was music that helped us cope. And he goes, the one bridge that nobody fought over was music. He goes, we
Ah.
had arguments over land, we had arguments over cartels, we had arguments over money, we had arguments over everything. The one item we never argued about was music. And he
Mm.
said it's the one thing that binds all of us, and it bonds all of us together in the right way. So I
Yeah.
focused on this as well, and that's the one thing that transcends generations, right? We talked about
Right.
the expressive generation that's coming up that don't see things the same way as the previous generation, but the music is still the same.
Hmm.
The music, whether it's a
Yeah.
variation or an evolution of it, it's still the same base, right? The same
Right.
foundation. And I thought it was powerful. And I stopped and I said, you know, that applies worldwide.
Yeah.
That's just not, and this person was a simple person living in the outskirts of Medellin that said something this profound. And I remember I joked to them. I said, I got to find you a stadium, a stage, and a podium, and a United Nations logo, and have you speak in front of it because I think
Yes.
it's worth it to say that. And
Yeah.
he started laughing as we said that because he's right. You,
Yeah.
you go talk to somebody in Kingdom 13, like a friend of yours, Jason. It's the same thing. It's the music that helped
Hmm.
us help them cope. You go talk to anybody who was a kid during the cartels. You go talk to them. It's music that helped them cope,
Yeah.
right? And
Yeah.
it's amazing. You talk to some of the guides in Kingdom 13. they'll tell you about music. One of them
Mm.
is, his name is Cabal. He's a friend. He's absolutely hilarious. Him and his son were actually participants, or they were contestants on X Factor,
Oh, cool.
as R&B, and he
Uh-huh.
was rapping and whatnot, and he did a great job, right? And
Yeah.
he did a great job. But he said the same thing. He was music is what transcends. It's what
Hmm.
allows us to cope and allows us to represent and reflect, and to also to express who we are.
That's
So that
cool.
was pretty powerful.
I like it.
Yeah.
Like it.
Holy cow.
Well,
We went everywhere today.
we did. We did. We went everywhere. It was good.
We're gonna have to take a look at social media later on to see if I said something that's gonna make me put my foot in my mouth next week.
Oh my God.
We'll see.
Well, hopefully not. I mean, but maybe so.
It
Getting
needs to be
people
said.
riled up is a good thing.
And
Um,
for the record, just so and I'm going to start doing this every episode now. A couple episodes back, we talked about tourism ministers who kind of hide behind their title or their desk.
yeah.
Just for the record, the Minister of Tourism for Peru still has not reached out to actually have a conversation with us. I just want to make sure I go on record saying that.
Right. So hopefully that happens because you had a situation where you guys got kind of well, actually think about this, Ashish. Maybe the minister has reached out to you because you guys got you got what's ignored again, right?
We did. We got ignored
Maybe
again
maybe
in
they are
Miami.
reaching out. Maybe
Yeah,
that's
maybe
the
you know
message.
what, you're right. Maybe they are answering us loudly. I'm just too stupid to see what the answer is, but there it is. Maybe there's that. All right,
It
well, in
could
that
be.
case,
Maybe you have gotten your
maybe
answer.
I have got my answer loud and clear. Got it. No problem. Just
Yeah.
I have to go up because you know what? I called them out a few episodes ago, and I had somebody, one of our listeners had found me and actually talked to me and said,
Yeah.
you know, why are you calling them out? I said, why not?
Yeah.
If not us, then who?
Yeah.
We're not some resistance group, right? This is not Star Wars. We're simply calling a spade a spade. You know, and the difference when we talk about Colombia is that the ministers in Colombia are engaged.
Yeah.
They are engaged at all levels. They're always wanting to promote and do different things, and it's really cool to see because again, they're fighting two battles simultaneously,
Hmm.
getting you to fall in love with their country while making sure they're not defined by what happened.
Yeah.
So
It's
pretty powerful stuff,
it is
especially and
powerful.
man and I will tell anybody who listens, anybody who wants to listen, if you're looking at, you know, if I get asked what happens to Venezuela next or what happens, just look at Medellin.
Yeah.
Just look at Medellin. That is your poster child. That is your case study for how a country and a city should transform. Medellin as a microcosm. And I keep saying that word, I know, but it really is just that. It's a
Yeah.
microcosm of a whole country. If you could replicate the transformation Medellin has been through to other countries, you would see transformation there as well.
Yeah.
You just have to replicate it, and it's something very powerful. And you know, and again, something you asked earlier about their past.
Hmm.
They're proud of it.
Yeah.
They're not trying to hide it. They're proud of it. And you know what? You can't blame them for that.
No.
So,
Yeah. They are who they are because of that. So,
right. It's defined them and they're proud of it. And they, whatever side they're on, they're proud of where that took them.
yep.
And you can't fault that one bit.
No, it's true.
Yeah.
All right. Next, it looks like we're going to talk about next week. We still going to talk about water,
Yeah, we are.
the silent suffering and communities desperate for water.
We are.
That's
It's
a
a big
big
powerful,
topic.
it's a big
Big
powerful
to
topic.
unpack.
It's
Yeah.
gonna be a huge topic. I'm glad I'm having it with you because I think you understand it better than most. So it's gonna be great. So
Why? Because of all my time on the water?
yes, exactly. Exactly. There's some cool stories that are there, and you know what? I'm looking forward to because I think I was showing you, right? Our podcast subscriber base is growing
It
rapidly.
is.
It is
Yeah.
growing rapidly, faster than it ever has, and it means that our topics are hitting a nerve.
Good.
Despite my best intentions, they're hitting a nerve, which is great. So I think that you know when we start talking about water, there is some really powerful stories that are there.
Hmm.
I am going to bring up the ministers of tourism for different countries again because they have the power to fix it. They have the
Yeah.
power to do something about it. They have the power to bring it into the narrative, but they're not. And it's
Yeah.
not necessarily their fault, but we're going to talk about that next week.
All right. I'm here for it.
That's it. Excellent.
All right. Well, this was fun.
Absolutely. So till next time.
Till next time.
All right. Stay tuned, everybody. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Thank you for listening to The Sustainable Voice. If you have a success story of your own, please reach out and share it with us. We'd love to hear from you. See you next time.